Thus far, you learned a bit how async data works, with dummy data but still with asynchronous code. Now, what's happening right now is, on our page, if we navigate around, reload it, navigate to the blog, we constantly have to wait for data to be fetched. We constantly have to wait for new requests being made to the server. Now, this might be what you want, because maybe all your pages use very different data. But sometimes you also want to fetch data and load it into your Vuex store so that you can use it in the rest of your application, let's say. Be that because you want to shorten the loading times or because you somehow in your application need that data outside of the component where you loaded it and you want to conveniently have it in the store. So let me show you how you load data into the Vuex store instead of just loading it in the component. And for that, we of course need a Vuex store. So let's see how we can add one. Adding Vuex to Nuxt.js apps is super simple. You don't have to install the dependency, it's already built in. You have to add some files, as so often in Nuxt.js, configuration happens through files, if you want to really use it. You have two different modes of which you can choose. The first one is the classic mode. There you simply create an index.js file in a store folder in your root Nuxt project. And then you have one store and one module for the entire app. You can then add mutations, actions, and getters and so on to the index.js file. The alternative is the modules mode. If you have more data that goes into your store, you want to create multiple .js files in the store folder, where the name in front of .js becomes the name of the module, and you have namespaced modules now. Check the official Vuex docs or my entire Vue course if you want to learn more about Vuex modules. Essentially, that allows you to slice your store up into different modules so that you don't end up with one gigantic index.js file, but that you have multiple smaller files. You still define mutations and so on, but in the different .js files for the given module. Now let's add the store and see this in action. To create a store, the simplest thing we can do is we can go to the store folder, create it if you don't have it, and add an index.js file to use that classic mode. In that file, you first of all need to import Vuex from Vuex. You don't need to run npm install or anything like that though, it already ships with Nuxt. In here, you should create a function, and I'm just using a syntax where I store a function, a constant, which you can name as you want, but I'll name it create store because that is what it will do. It will create a store, and here I'm using an arrow function. Now, why do we create a function instead of just an object which represents the store? Because it should be callable by Nuxt, which will execute it on the server to set up the store. So therefore here we return a new Vuex store. If we returned an object instead of the function, then all users of our app would actually get the same instance, because on the server in Node.js where this runs, if we have a plain object stored, well then we always get that object for every connecting user. If we have a function that returns a new store, as this does, then every new user receives his own store, which we of course want, especially if we start managing user-specific data in the store. So here we got the Vuex store, and it's now initialized with a JavaScript object where you can set up your starting state, your mutations, and so on. So typically, these are the building blocks you have, and these are the normal building blocks you have in any Vuex store. There's nothing special about the Nuxt version. It is the normal Vuex package in the end. So in here, we could have our loaded posts, which is an empty array initially. And then we could have a mutation where we have set posts. There we receive the state and some payload, which could be our posts in the end. This method can be executed by us, and there we could set state loaded posts equal to posts, which I assume to be an array. We can then also have an action, set posts, and in that action we could commit this mutation. Now, as you probably know, in Vuex your actions receive a special object, which you can also name context, or to make it less confusing, let's name it Vuex context. And this will have a couple of helpful methods. One of them is the commit method, which you can execute to commit a mutation. You pass the mutation name as a string, so setPost refers to this mutation, and then an optional payload. Here that could be posts, which I also expect to get as a payload for this action. So now we're just forwarding it. In the getters here, we could then return loaded posts. Here, to each getter, we also get the state passed as an argument by Vuex automatically, and then I just return state loaded posts like this so that we can use it in our components. With that loaded here, we can call this action or make this commit here to store loaded posts in the store. We can now just save that file, however not before exporting as a default. Exporting the create store method as a default, I should say. So create store is that constant we created here, which holds this factory function giving us a store, and now we're exporting this as the file default. The rest will be handled by Next and will automatically inject the store into all our components. Now we can populate it in our pages, like here in the posts component, so in the posts folder, the index.view file. Here we could add a lifecycle hook, maybe create it, so once the component was created, and we could then access this $store dispatch set posts like this and pass this loaded posts, our array of loaded posts, which we load through async data, to the store. This will run once the component has been initialized. Now let's see if that works. Let's go to that posts page and let's reload it. And now how do we find out if it worked? Well, maybe you got the Vue developer tools installed. Then it's really easy because there you can look into your Vuex store. And there you see we have a base state where actually the loaded posts are part of the state of the store. If you don't have that installed, you don't want to install it, simply console log the store after you dispatched it, or simply console log this store getters loaded posts to refer to your getter once you dispatched it. If you do this, you also see that console log with your data. So this is working. It is not the best way we can do this though. This will initialize our store, and maybe this is all we need, but we can also ensure that this runs on the server if the page is loaded for the first time, and that we initialize our store instead of calling async data here. Let me show you how this works in the next lecture.